Join us in this detailed tutorial from our expert trainer who walks you through each step. For an even more hands-on experience, you can download the course files linked below and follow along. Let's get started.
Ensuring that the data that we use is clean is often overlooked, but it is an integral part of being able to analyze a data set accurately. My name is Deborah Ashby, and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for about 27 years. So I've pretty much seen Excel evolve from a fairly basic application in the 1990s to the very complex product that it is today. So we're just going to start out first of all by discussing, why do we clean data in Excel? Why is it so important? Because for me, this is one of the most important things that often gets overlooked. So we'll go through why we clean data, and we'll take a look at some of the common issues you might find when you're working with data that isn't necessarily your own. So maybe you've downloaded data from a system, or maybe you've been sent a spreadsheet by somebody else and you need to tidy it up. We'll take a look at some of the common issues that might arise, and then we'll go through and we'll look at how we can deal with those. So I'm going to show you things like how to quickly adjust rows and columns, how you can delete out blank rows from your data, and also quickly fill any blank cells. We'll take a look at things like removing duplicates and clearing messy formatting. We'll take a look at how we can format our columns correctly, and also how we can convert numbers stored as text back to numbers. I'm going to show you how you can do things like change the case so that everything is consistent across your spreadsheets. And we'll also take a look at how we can remove any weird spaces, line breaks, and non-printing characters from our data set. I'll show you how to find and replace data. That might be something that you're reasonably familiar with. Checking spelling. Hopefully we're all reasonably familiar with how to do that in Microsoft, but we'll run through it anyway. I'll show you how to format data as a table, and also how just some basics of using functions to extract data. I'm going to throw in here, we are going to do a little bit of pivot tables. So if you're interested in that, just after we've cleaned our data, we're going to put it into a nice pivot table. I'm going to show you a couple of little tricks in there as well. And I'm also going to show you a little bit on how you can use Power Query to clean your data, as opposed to doing it all with Excel functions and utilities. So quite a lot of stuff to cover there. As usual, I'm going to throw in as many helpful hints and keyboard shortcuts as I can, just to make sure that we're working through as consistently and as efficiently as possible. You might come across things like inconsistent column widths and row heights. You might find that your data set has blank rows, columns, or cells. And things like blank rows really do cause us problems when we're doing things like pivot tables. We might have duplicate data, so duplicate rows in there. Again, that is going to throw off our analysis. We might have inconsistent case, which can make our analysis look really messy and hard for people to read. The same goes for things like inconsistent spacing. It can start to make our analysis look messy. We might have numbers in our data that, instead of being formatted as numbers, they're formatted as text. And this can cause a whole heap of problems, particularly if we're using formulas which rely on those being numbers. They're not going to calculate correctly. So we want to make sure that our numbers are actually numbers. We might have our columns formatted incorrectly. So instead of a date column, we might have it formatted as text or general. And again, it's not going to display correctly. We might find that we have things like messy formatting that's been brought across. This is a really common one, particularly if you're downloading files or copying information from the web into Excel. It will come across with that formatting from the original source. So we might want to do things like remove unwanted formatting, or borders, or bold, things like that. We might find that when we download our data set, that the text isn't split up correctly, or it isn't split up as we need it to be split up. For example, if you have a column that has people's names in it, you may need it to be split up into first name and last name. So we need to know how we can deal with that type of scenario as well. We might have things in our data that need to be replaced. So maybe we need to replace abbreviations with the full word, things like that. We need to make sure that our headers are specified in our data as headers. Again, it's going to make our analysis a lot easier. And we want to remove anything that's completely random. So if we've got any strange characters that have come across or any random line breaks, we need to know how to deal with that as well. Now, these are just some of the issues that you might come across when you're downloading a data set. Now, just by looking at this data set, you can probably, it looks a mess. You can see many things that are wrong with this data set. So some of the things which are immediately obvious, well, we can see that the rows and the columns are not wide enough and not tall enough. So for some of these, it's kind of cutting off the data. So we need to do something about that. I can see that I have these hash marks. So again, that's because the column isn't wide enough. I can see that we have some strange orange formatting going on. And I can see that some cells have borders and other cells don't. So we need to deal with that. I can see that we have blank rows in here. And I can also see in column B that I have some inconsistencies when it comes to spacing and also case. So those are the things that I can see immediately just by looking at this spreadsheet. Now, there might be other little gremlins lurking around that I can't quite see at the moment, but we will see them as we start to work through. Now, the first thing I'm going to do so that I can see all of my data is we're basically going to auto fit the columns and the rows. Now, the quickest way to do this, and we're going to deal with the columns first of all, is to hover our mouse over column A until we get that black down arrow, click and drag across so that we're selecting all of those columns. And then if we want to auto fit all of the columns so that they are wide enough for the data contained within them, hover your mouse over any of these borders until you get that double-headed arrow and just double click. And that will auto fit all of those columns. That is basically a quick way of going to the home ribbon, going into format and going to auto fit column width. That option will do exactly the same. It's just a lot quicker to double click. Now we can do the same thing when it comes to the rows. If you take a look here, we've got some rows in here. So I could do auto fit row height as well. Again, I could double click on the row boundary in order to change that as well. Okay, so now we've adjusted the column widths and the row heights. Really nice and simple. Well, I can see that I have some blank rows in my data set. So where we have row 8, that's blank, row 13 is blank, row 19, row 29. Now I could go through, if I just had 1 or 2 blank rows in my data, I could simply select the row, right click and go to delete. But if I've got a data set that's very large, maybe I've got 20,000 rows and I've got blank rows throughout, I really don't want to be going through doing these individually. That is going to be too long. It's going to take me too much time. So we can do this quickly by utilizing Go to Special. Now, once again, I'm going to select all of the columns. So I'm going to hover my mouse over column A until we get that little black drop down arrow and drag across. Now, a quick way of jumping to Go to Special is to use the keyboard shortcut Control G. That's going to take you to Go to, and then we can simply click Special. Now, what we can do in here is that we can tell Excel what we want to select in our data. So we want to select all of the blanks that are contained within our selection. So when I do this and click on OK, can you see now it's selecting all of those blank rows, which means I can delete them all in one go. So I'm going to go up to the home ribbon, into delete, and then delete sheet rows. And that is going to get rid of them all in one go. So much quicker than going through and doing them all individually. Maybe we have blank cells like this. It's always better to have a value in here than just leave the cell blank if we're doing some kind of analysis. So even if you just put a 0 in here, that is better than nothing. So how do we automatically input a 0 into all of the blank cells? Well, again, we can select the entire data set if you wanted to, Control A, or if it's just in specific columns, you can just select those columns. And again, we're going to use Go to Special. So Control G again, Special, and we're going to choose blanks. This time it's just going to highlight those blank cells. And if I want to put a 0 in all of those in one go, I just press 0 and Control Enter. And it's going to fill them all in. Okay, so Go to Special, type in 0, Control, Enter. That is a way to deal with blank cells. It's always better to have 0 as opposed to nothing in there. Let's deal with the formatting, because we've got these grey shaded backgrounds on some cells, we've got orange, and I can also see that I've got some weird sort of borders up here as well. So I want to make everything more consistent and just remove all of this formatting. So I'm going to select all of my data. So I can click anywhere in my data, little keyboard shortcut to select all of your data, Control A to select everything. Now that Control A keyboard shortcut is worth noting if you're clicked outside of your data set. So if I'm just clicked randomly on a cell here and I press Control A, that's going to select the entire spreadsheet. If you just want to select your data, make sure you're clicked within your data when you press Control A. And this is a really simple one. We can go to the Home tab. In the editing group, we have a clear option just here. And we have a few things that we can clear, but I just want to clear the formatting. So I'm just going to choose clear formats, and that's going to remove those weird borders and the background shading that I have there. Nice and straightforward. Something which is actually quite hard to see just by looking at your data is if you have any duplicates in your data set. And when I say duplicate, I mean an exact duplicate. So where every single column is duplicated. So it's a true duplicate. How can we remove those, or how can we check for those? Well, in Excel, we do have a Remove Duplicates button, which you will find on the Data ribbon. And Remove Duplicates is over in the Data Tools group. Now, the thing with this button is when you click it, you can tell Excel that your data has headers, which we do. And then we can choose which columns we're looking for duplicates in. So if I want to only remove exact duplicate records where we have exactly the same thing in every single cell duplicated, I want to make sure that I have all of the columns selected just here. So I'm only looking for exact duplicate records. Let's click on OK, and you can see it's found 5 duplicate values and it's removed them. Click on OK again, and they're gone. Okay, so a really nice quick way to remove exact duplicates from your data set. Let's take a look here at column F, because we've got a couple of little things going on here. Now, notice that manufacturing price, we have values in here. So this is basically $3 this is supposed to be. But take a look at these two just here. We have little green triangles next to them. Now, this is because the number in this cell, for whatever reason, Excel thinks this is text as opposed to a number. And we can tell that because text is always aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, whereas numbers are always aligned to the right. So for the rest of these are aligned to the right, so those are correct. But for these two here, they are aligned to the left-hand side of the cell, so it thinks it's text. Now, I want to make sure that these are converted back to numbers. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. If I've just got 1 or 2, the easiest way to do this is simply to click on the little triangle and just say convert to number. And that's literally going to take it from a number back to text. Now, let me just undo that, Control Z, because what if I have quite a few of these through a very large data set? Maybe I've got over 100 of them. I don't want to have to go through each one, selecting the triangle and converting them to text. So there is a little trick that we can use to do these all in one go. And this does seem a little bit strange, but let me show you how this works. What I'm going to do is somewhere over in a blank cell, I'm going to type in the number 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy this number 1, Control C. I'm going to go to the column that I want to apply it to. So let's select all of that data, Control Shift down arrow to select everything. And then we're going to go to paste. We're going to go into paste special, and we're going to say multiply. Click on OK, and that will convert everything to a number. So that is a much quicker way of doing things if you have lots of numbers in a column that are for some reason stored as text. That's a quick way of converting them back to numbers. Okay, so really nice and straightforward. Let's talk about number formatting. let's deal with that. Now, making sure that the text or the columns are formatted correctly with the correct number formatting is really important. Now, for the most part, if we take a look at the home ribbon in this number group, most things are formatted as general. And general is kind of your middle of the road formatting. You can really apply general to most things, particularly text columns. There are some columns, though, that you want to make sure that you have the correct formatting, such as if you have currency or numbers or dates, you want to make sure we apply the correct formatting for those. So let's take a look through here. Units sold, that's a number. So I want to make sure that we have this set to number. And again, we can adjust those decimal places. I'm going to take those down to 0. Now, all of the next few, these ones are basically currencies. So manufacturing price, gross sales, sales, COGS, and profit. So I'm going to select all of these columns and I'm going to press Control 1 to bring up my Format Cells dialog box. Now I'm going to change these to accounting format. People always ask me, what is the difference between currency format and accounting format? I tend to use accounting format because with accounting format, what you'll find is that when you have numbers in a cell, accounting format makes sure that the decimal place is always lined up and that the currency symbol is kind of shoved across to the left-hand side to keep it out of the way of the numbers. If we use currency format, the currency symbol is right next to your number and the decimal places aren't necessarily lined up. So when it comes to reading down numbers, I prefer accounting format. I find it a lot easier to read. So I'm going to apply that. I'm going to take my decimal places down to 0 and click on OK to apply that formatting. And actually, I think for manufacturing price, I'm going to take those up. Let's move across to the date column. Now, again, in this date column, I've got some strange numbers, and this is a very common thing to find when you're working in Excel. You'll have a date column and you'll look in that date column and these look nothing like dates, and you're left wondering what on earth these exactly are. Well, if you want to know what these numbers actually are, this is basically the number of days past the 1st of the 1st, 1900. So according to Excel, the beginning of time was the 1st of the 1st, 1900, and this is just the number of days past that date. So effectively, dates are simply numbers, but we don't display them as dates until we apply date formatting. So if you take a look at column L, currently this is set to general formatting, so it's just displaying the number underneath. So all we need to do here is change this to short date format, and then we get our correct dates. Now in column B, where we have the country names, we have a few different issues. So we have some inconsistent case. So you can see that some of these are in capital letters and some of them are in proper case where the first letter is capitalized. And I want everything to look like that. So I need to convert the uppercase words into proper case. Also notice that I have some weird indentation going on here. So if you look just before Canada in row 2, we've got a large gap just there. The same thing down here, we have some weird large gaps. So I want to make sure that I remove any weird spacing issues from here as well. Now we can use Excel text functions to do both of these things in one go. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Now, when I'm going through and cleaning up or tidying up a specific column, I like to add in a helper column. So a quick way of adding a brand new empty column is to just select where you want to add and then Control-Shift+. That is going to give you a new column. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the case. So there are 3 functions you can use depending on how you want to change your case. So we have upper, we have lower, and we have proper. So if I wanted to change everything to uppercase, I could use upper. The only argument is the text we want to change. Close the bracket, hit enter, it's going to be uppercase. If I want to change everything to lowercase, I use lower. Nice and straightforward. But in this case, I want to change everything to proper case. Enter, and there we go. If I double click the fill handle, you can see now that all of those words which were in uppercase are now in proper case. So that is looking pretty good. Now take a look at a couple of things in here. It hasn't done anything for the spacing that we have at the beginning just here. So we want to combine it with another Excel function called trim. And what trim does is it will remove any erroneous spaces at the beginning of words or at the end of words, because sometimes if we double click, you can see here the cursor is right up against Canada. So I can see that we don't have any spaces after Canada, but you might find that a few spaces sometimes have got in there and your cursor will appear over here, which means there is space in here. And again, that can cause you problems when you're doing your analysis, but it's really hard to see spaces at the end. So I always like to run things like this using the trim function to remove any of that weird spacing. And the good thing is we don't need to add another helper column. We can simply combine trim with our proper command. So let's go up to the formula bar, and I'm just going to add trim on the front here. Our text is generated by the proper command, and we just need to make sure that we close off trim at the end. Control Enter will keep us in the same cell, and then I can double click to copy that down. So we've managed to do both things in one go. Now there is another function that you can add in here, which will deal with things like line breaks. Now we don't have any of those in here, but if you have a forced line break, and that generally occurs, and if I just show you very quickly, when people press Alt Enter in between two words, and it looks something like that, if we have line breaks, we can effectively remove those using another command called clean. And clean will also remove any non-printing characters that it finds in a cell. You can always add on to the front of this clean as well, add another closing bracket on the end, and you're basically running three different functions on one piece of data. It's going to clean up everything. We can double click to copy it down, and we just have one nice tidy formula. So really simple to clean that up. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that where we have USA, because we've converted everything into proper case, it's also converted USA down here. Now, we are going to deal with that in a moment because we're actually going to change what this says. So don't worry about that too much at the moment. Everything else is pretty much correct, which means we can simply add in the title up here, like so. One little trick here. Because we don't want two columns with the same thing, we only want to keep our clean column. Look what happens if I try and delete out this column just here. I'm going to get a whole bunch of reference errors. Now we get those because the formulas that we're using in that cell, so these formulas just here, reference column B. So if we delete column B, that is why we're getting those reference errors. So what we need to do, and this is a little trick that I use all the time, is we need to basically use paste special and just paste the values, because that is going to remove all of the underlying formulas. So what we can do here is we can select column C, Control C to copy, and then we're going to go to paste, and we're going to say paste the values only. So what that does is it just leaves the text that we can see, but it removes the formulas underneath. So now you can see when I click in the formula bar, that trim and proper formula has disappeared, which means we can now delete out that column safely and nothing's going to happen to our text. All right, so really useful little functions. Let's deal with this USA in here. I'm going to do a find and replace. So we're going to select column B and let's press Control H to bring up replace. So this is where we can just simply say what we want to find and then what we want to replace it with. So I want it to find USA and I want it to replace it with the capitalized version of USA. I can click replace all. It's made 140 replacements. Click on OK, and we can close that down. So a really nice and simple, quick way to do that. Of course, we would always want to run a spell check on our data. And again, this is very straightforward. You can go up to the review ribbon and we have the spelling just here. Yes, I want to continue checking. It's telling me that all of my spelling is correct, which is great. So you do want to make sure that you do run a spell check, because again, if you have one little thing spelt wrong and you're trying to do an analysis, for example, I've got government up here in cells A2 and A3. If I have one of these spelt slightly wrong, if I'm doing an analysis, it's going to think that those are two entirely separate words as opposed to the same thing. So if I'm doing anything which requires an aggregation, sums, things like that, then that's going to cause us problems. So really important to spell check your data set as well. I always put my data into a table before I even attempt to analyze it. So a quick way of doing that is to press Control T. It's going to pick up where my table is located. You can see those marching ants around the outside. Very important to specify my table has headers. Click on OK. And now I have my data in an Excel table. Now notice what happens as soon as I do this. I now get a new ribbon called Table Design. And we can see that at the top here. And this is where I have all different kinds of tools for my table. So if I want to change the color of my table, maybe I don't like this style particularly, I can change it from there. I can add a total row, things like that. Another thing that we can do here is we can give our table a name. So when we create a table in Excel, in this properties group, you can see it's called Table 1 by default. And every time you create a table, Excel is going to give it that really generic name, Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, so on and so forth. Now, it's always advantageous to give your table a more meaningful name. So I'm going to call my table sales underscore data. And again, when you're naming your tables, you can't have any spaces in those names. So if you've got two words like I do here, you need to separate them with an underscore or just have no space in the middle there. Now, why are tables so important? Well, tables auto expand. So if you create some kind of chart or pivot table, and then you want to add more data into the bottom of this table next month, it means that the table will expand to accommodate the new data. And it means that any charts that are built off of this data can be updated simply by clicking one button. Now, I don't want to go too far off down that route because we really just want to focus on cleaning data in this session, but that is why tables are so important. I'm going to show you a very quick pivot table just to show you how this works once we've cleaned up our data. So I've got my nice looking clean data set. I'm going to put it into a pivot table first of all. So from the table design ribbon that I'm currently clicked on in the tools group, I'm going to choose summarize with pivot table. So it's picked up my table range. Remember, it's called sales data, and I'm going to put this on a new worksheet. So let's click on OK. And here is my blank pivot table report. If you're not used to working with pivot tables, what it basically does is it imports all of the column headings of our data and puts them into this pivot table fields area. And we can see all of the column headings listed just here. We can then drag and drop these column headings into any of these areas to build a pivot table. And the cool thing about pivot tables is that they are completely dynamic. So if we don't like one analysis, we can simply change it by moving the fields around. So I could do a very quick analysis here. Let's do something like, let's go for country. Let's drag that into rows. And maybe I want to see the gross sales by country. So I'm going to drag gross sales into there. And now I have my pivot table. If I hadn't cleaned my data, I could have some very weird things going on in there. I could have blanks. The data might not be adding up correctly. It wouldn't look as tidy as it looked if I hadn't cleaned my data first. And it could be very confusing for anybody who's looking at this pivot table report. So really important to clean your data. Let's put it into a quick pivot chart so I can show you some of the differences. We are going to do a little bit of formatting here. I'm going to right click and we're going to go to value field settings because I want to tidy up these numbers just here. So if we go into number format, I'm going to apply a counting format to these numbers in the pivot table. I'm going to take the decimal places down. Let's click on OK and click on OK again to get those into a nicer format. So because I have a small data set here, I'm going to create a very quick pivot chart. But I don't want to include the grand total in my pivot chart, so I'm going to turn that off first of all. So let's go up to the Design tab, to Grand Totals, and I'm going to say, let's turn off grand totals for rows and columns. And now I can create a little pivot chart. And we'll just do a very basic column chart, like so, and we can add that into our worksheet. So this is all coming from our cleaned up data set. If we hadn't done any of that cleaning, this is not going to look as nice as it does. Now we could make this look a lot nicer. We could spend a lot more time formatting this. I am going to show you a couple of little tricks here, which I think are worthwhile. Once we get our pivot chart into here, in general, I tend to hide these gray filter buttons. So I'm going to right click and say hide all field buttons on charts. I like to keep my charts looking as clean as possible. In general, I remove everything that I don't need. So this legend here, which is showing the total, isn't really doing a great deal. So let's just delete that out. I'm going to display the actual values. So the gross sales, I'm going to display them above each of the bars instead of at the side here. So what we can do is right click, add data labels, and it's going to add those values, and I can then delete this axis just here. Again, we're trying to get this to look as clean as possible. Now, I still don't particularly like the way that this looks. I'm going to widen out these bars very slightly. If we right click and go to Format Data Series, I'm going to take the gap width down a little bit to make these bars wider. And what I could do is I could change the formatting on these numbers so that they say million as opposed to the full number just here. So this is a little bit of custom formatting to make everything look a little bit neater. And again, this is cleaning up a pivot chart that we've created. So it still sort of falls under that whole bracket of cleaning up our data and making things look as presentable as possible. So if we want to make any changes to the way that these numbers are formatted, if we go back to our pivot table, right click and go into value field settings and into number format, we can apply some custom number formatting of our own. So when we choose custom, we can type into here, and if we type £, comma, comma, and then type in an M, it's going to format it as 27M as opposed to 27, 000, 000. So it's a much neater notation when you're trying to present data in your charts. So we can put a £, 2 commas, and then M to represent millions. Let's click on OK and OK again. And you can see immediately this looks a lot neater. So that is just a little trick that you could possibly do if you want to make your charts look nice and clean. A little bit of custom formatting in there. Another thing we might want to do here is right click and we can format our data labels, and I'm going to choose to display these on the inside end of the bar, and I'm going to make them white and maybe bold, and then I can simply add my chart title. So this is, say, gross sales by country. And of course, we could do a lot more formatting here to make this look really nice and smart. If we open up this text file and just take a quick look at it, this is something, again, that you might get downloaded out of some kind of third-party system. And this is where we kind of have data, but it's not in a really great readable format. So I can see here that we have some column headings. We've got employee name, hire date, salary, department, job title. And these are separated by what we call a delimiter. And in this case, the delimiter is a semicolon. So a semicolon basically separates all of the fields throughout this data. So we're going to use that semicolon as our starting point to break up this data and bring it into Excel. So this is the data that we're going to use. Let's close down this file, because what we can do is we can directly import text files into Excel and then we can clean them up. So if we go up to File, all we need to do is go to Open, and then we just need to find our text file. So for me, if I go to the desktop, because this is where I have it stored, now remember, if you're going from within Excel, Excel only shows by default files with a .xlsx extension. So what you might find you have to do is click on All Files to be able to see that text file just there. So I'm going to select the text file. Let's click on Open, and immediately Excel recognizes that this isn't an Excel file. It is a text file. So we need to tell Excel what to do with it. You can see here the text import wizard has opened. So the first thing it's asking us is the type of file that best describes this text file. And the top option is delimited. So it's saying, do we have characters such as commas or tabs separating each field? And we can see just below, we have a preview of our data. Now, if you remember, I said that we have delimiters, and the delimiter is the semicolon. That's what separates each of these fields. So we're going to keep it on delimited and click on Next. So now we need to tell Excel what delimiter is in use in our data set. So for us, that is a semicolon. Now I can choose that from here because we have it in our list. Now, as soon as I select semicolon, you can see that Excel knows where each of these columns breaks, because wherever we have a semicolon, that's where we have a new column. So this is looking pretty good. Let's click on Next. And I don't need to do anything here. I can click on Finish. And that is going to load that text file into Excel. And you can see it's broken it up into the correct columns. Now, again, this is where data cleaning comes in. I can see straight away that I need to widen out these columns. So I'm going to select everything, double click to auto fit the contents. I can see in here, employee name, column A, I have people's names all in uppercase. Now, I actually don't want these names to display like that. I don't want it to say Juarez Jose. I want it to say Jose Juarez. And I also want it to be in proper case. So what I could do here is I'm going to insert another column, Control Shift plus. Now I could use text functions to do this, but that's going to take a lot of time. So instead, I'm going to do everything all in one go using Flash Fill. Now, when we're using Flash Fill, all we need to do here is tell Excel how we want the text to look. So I want it to look like this, Jose Juarez. So I'm switching those names around and I'm also making them lowercase. Control Enter leaves us in the same cell. Control E invokes Flash Fill and it copies that format down. Take a look at that. Such a magical little tool. Now notice here it's also switched around the title, so we might just have to drag this across or retype it in. That's not too much of a problem. And then we can quickly delete out that first column. So much quicker. Now, there are two other ways that you can invoke Flash Fill. So let's take a look at both of those. I'm going to insert another column just here, Control Shift plus, and I want to make all of these lowercase. So again, I can use Flash Fill. I just need to tell it what the first one needs to look like. And then if I press Enter, as soon as I start to type the second one, can you see it ghosts down? So Flash Fill is recognizing the pattern that I want to apply. And now all I need to do is press Enter to accept that. So again, Flash Fill is amazing. And that's just two different ways that you can invoke it. Let's take a look at the final way. We're going to do the same thing, but this time with the job title, we're going to change these to lowercase, but we're going to use Flash Fill again. So we want intern in here, Control Enter, and we can go up to the data ribbon and we have the Flash Fill button just here. When we click it, it's going to copy that down. How simple is that? So it makes cleaning up your data a lot quicker and a lot easier. Flash Fill is the magic little button. Once again, we can then go through tidying up what we need to tidy up. So I'm going to probably apply some currency formatting or counting formatting to this particular column. I've got date formatting on here. We are pretty much good to go. The final thing to do is just Control T to put this into a table. And this is ready for analysis. Lots of little techniques that are going to come in really useful the next time that you analyze your data. Let's use Power Query to combine some files and clean up that data. So let's take a look at the data first of all. Now I've got a folder here and it's called Sales Data. If I open up this folder, I have two files in here, Sales Data for 2017 and Sales Data for 2018. Now if I open up one of these files, you can see what we have in here. So we've got a date column, we've got an order ID column, we have a customer number column. This whole data set are basically trip sales for particular years, in this case 2017. So I can see the trip in here, I can see the salesperson, the trip price, and also the year. And the other file that I have in this folder is just the same file, it's just data for 2018. So maybe this is data for some kind of travel agency. And every year, a file for that year's sales gets dropped into this sales data folder. So what we want to make sure that we do is that when a new file gets added to this folder, all of the data and all of the analysis that we've done automatically updates. So we can do this by combining the files together and then making sure that we're linking to this particular folder. So that's quite complicated and quite a lot to get your head around. So let's take a look at it slowly. Now I'm going to close down this file and we're just going to start with a blank workbook. So what I'm going to do is we're going to jump up to the Data tab, and in the Get and Transform group, we're going to go to Get Data from File, and I'm going to say I want to get data from a folder because I want to include both of those files. The sales files for 2017 and 2018 are both in the sales data folder. So effectively what I'm doing here is I'm connecting to that particular folder. So let's say from folder. And now I need to select the folder. So I have mine stored on my desktop, and it's this one here, the sales data folder that contains those two sales data files. I'm just going to select the folder. Let's click on open. And we're now creating a connection between Excel and that folder. You can see here, it's had a look in the folder and it can see Sales File 2017 and Sales File 2018. Those are the two files within that folder. So everything is looking good so far. Now at this stage, if we take a look at the bottom, we have a few different things we can do. We can choose to combine these files together. So if your files are exactly the same, and what I mean by that is they have the same structure, the same column headings, instead of having two separate files, you can simply have them all in one file that contains all of the data for 2017 and 2018. So you can do that, which is exactly what we're going to do. But if you want to clean up your data, or at least check your data to see if it needs to be cleaned up, we have a Transform Data button at the bottom. So let's click on Transform Data. Now this opens up Power Query. And if you've never been into Power Query before, this can look a little bit intimidating. But basically what we do in Power Query is exactly what we've just done with our Excel files. This is where we can come to clean up our data. And everything that we did manually in Excel, we can find in this Power Query editor. So we can do things like remove blank rows. We can split columns by delimiter. We can do a find and replace. We can change the formatting of each of the columns. There's lots of things that we can do. So this is just a more graphical way of doing those things. Now, the first thing I want to do here is I want to take these two files, 2017 and 2018, and I want to combine them together. So I just have one big long file. Now, a quick way of doing that from here is to click these two downward arrows, which will combine both of these files into one file. And again, this can take a few seconds, but it's going to show you a preview of what this is going to look like. That looks pretty good to me. Let's click on OK. So it's going to open up the contents of both of those files and basically combine them together in one big long file. And we can check that because if we check the source name column at the top, you can see it includes data for 2017 and 2018. So that is perfect. So now I have this here, I can go through, I can look at my data in my columns, and I can see if I need to clean anything up in Power Query. Now I'm going to put this data into a pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to decide if I need all of these columns. But do I need the source name column? Well, no. This is a column which has basically been added in by Power Query, which just tells me what the file name is. And I'm not really going to need that in any analysis that I do of this data. So let's get rid of it. We can right click and we can choose Remove. Nice and straightforward. We can then go through and check to make sure that the data type we've selected for each of these columns is correct. So I have dates in this first column, and if I click the little calendar, this is where we can change or choose what type of data we have in this particular column. And I will say that most of the time, Power Query tends to get this correct. So this is a date and it's selected the correct format. Order ID, well, what have we got there? Well, this has chosen a whole number. Yep, that's fine. Customer, this is text. Yes, because it starts with text, so it's going to think that it's text. Trip is text, salesperson, so on and so forth. So these number formats are worth checking and changing if they are incorrect. Now, a couple of things that we can do to tidy up this data a bit better. If we take a look at this trip column, we can see here that we have a trip code, then we have a dash, and then we have the actual trip name. So if I'm thinking about analyzing this data using a pivot table, I might want to do a summary of the trip prices by the trip code. Now, currently I couldn't do that because I have the trip code and the trip name combined into one column. So what I'd probably do here is separate the trip code, have that in its own separate column, and then have the trip name in a separate column. So I basically want to split up this column. Now again, we could do this in Excel by using something like Flash Fill, or we could use text to columns or something like that. In Power Query, this is so simple. We just simply select the column that we want to split up, and then on the Transform tab in Split Column, we can say by delimiter, and then we can just choose where we want to split it. So where we have the dash is where I want to split. So we have a few different options in here. If you can't see what you want, you can go to Custom, and it's remembered it from when I last typed it in. We have a dash in there, click on OK, and it's going to split those into 2 columns. We can then rename these column headings. So double click, and I can call this trip code and this one name. And because I've split this column at the dash, there was a space either side of that dash. So I'm pretty sure that the trip name is now going to have an erroneous space at the beginning. But not to worry, because we can apply that trim function to this column. Remember, we used that before in Excel. I can select the column and we go to Format, and we have trim in here. Also notice we have the clean function in here. If we wanted to change to uppercase, lowercase, or capitalize, remember, again, we did that using Excel functions. In Power Query, we can simply select. So I'm going to choose the trim function, and I'm going to apply a trim to both of these columns that I just tidied up to remove any erroneous spaces. So those are a couple of things that you can do in Power Query to clean your data. Pretty much everything that we do in Excel, we can do in here. And then once we're happy with how our data looks, we can go to the Home tab, close and load, and I can load it directly into a pivot table. So let's go to Close and Load, and I'm going to say, create me a pivot table report, click on OK. And it's going to bring all of that data in, and I can just choose my fields to analyze by. So maybe I want the trip name in the rows, the trip price down here. And there is my pivot table made up of 2017 and 2018 data. I have both in there. If I want to apply a filter by year, I can drag the year column up to filters, and then I can choose, if I'm just interested in 2017, I can choose that way. The final thing I want to show you is what happens when we want to add 2019's data to this pivot table. Now, because of the way that we've set this up, we created a connection between Excel and the folder. So what happens is when we add a new file to this folder, it's going to automatically refresh all of the pivot tables. So let's take a look at that. Maybe it's the end of the year, and I have a little file just here, and we have this file just here with our 2019 sales data. Now I'm going to copy this, Control C, and we're going to add it to the sales data folder. So there we go. There's the new data for the new year. I want this to be included in my analysis. So because we already have that connection there, I simply need to go back to the pivot table. All we need to do is click refresh. It will bring across that data. And you can see here, it has brought it across because we have 2019 listed in here. All right. So any tables or pivot charts that you have attached will automatically update just by clicking that refresh button. So that is an advantage of pulling your data into Power Query, cleaning it up in there, combining it, and creating that connection with a folder.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Hi, from everyone at Simon Says It. We hope you're enjoying this training lesson. Please like this video to show your support for the channel. If you want to take your learning further, earn a certificate for this course, and gain access to over 200 courses ad-free, click up there and go to simonsaysit.com. Thanks for watching, and back to the course.
This serves as an introduction to Power Query if you've never used it before, whilst also showcasing some of the best tools available in the application to tidy up a dataset. My name is Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft MVP and instructor, And I've been using Power Query for probably about 10 years now, so a little bit of time. So let's take a quick look at the agenda, what we're going to be covering in the session. So for anybody who's new, we'll briefly go through exactly what Power Query is. And I'll start out by showing you an example of a messy dataset. You might be more familiar with working on messy datasets in Excel and maybe using things like Excel functions to tidy things up. I'm going to take a look at that, and then we're going to discuss the advantages of doing it in Power Query, and then we're going to tidy up a messy dataset using Power Query. And then we're going to talk a little bit about importing a text file with get and transform. We're going to take a look at the Power Query editor. So again, if you're not familiar with that and how that works and what all the different panes and ribbons are, we'll make sure that you're comfortable with that. And then we'll actually get into the fun part, which is cleaning up the data set with Power Query tools. So I'm not going to be able to run through absolutely everything, but we should be able to take a pretty horrendous data set and make it look really nice. Once we've tidied it up, we're then going to close and load it back into Excel. And we're going to create ourselves a little pivot table and pivot chart. And then I'm going to show you how easy it is to update and refresh all of the data if your file changes or if a new file gets added to the folder. So quite a few things to run through just there. Power Query can be used for many different things, not just cleaning data. I've listed some of them just here. So it is great for cleaning up data, and it's great for combining data as well. So if you have lots of different files that are all of a similar layout and you want to combine them all together, you can do that in Power Query. You can transform your data, you can refresh your data, and you can automate things as well. We're just going to focus on data cleaning, but just be aware that it's not just a data cleaning application. Now, a lot of the time, if you're working with data, it might be that you've downloaded a data set from maybe something like a third-party application. So if you maybe download a file every single week, it might be that that file comes into Excel and it's not in the most perfect format. And we always find that with data sets, particularly if they're not data sets that we've personally created, they're downloads, the data won't always be perfect. It won't be lined up in nice columns and rows. So we have to know a few skills in Excel in order to be able to get that data into a state so that it can be analyzed. Because most of the time, particularly with data sets like this is a very large data set, I'm probably going to want to analyze this by converting it into a pivot table and then maybe creating a chart or maybe creating a dashboard. But I can't do it if it looks like this, if it has lots of different things in here which shouldn't be there. So looking at this data set just here, you can probably see immediately some things that we would have to tidy up in order to be able to analyze this successfully. We have blank rows in here. We probably want to get rid of all of those. We have things like weird spacing going on in column F. You can see that Annie Thurman is kind of nudged across the cell. We have some inconsistent case. So you can see the first two items here in column G are in uppercase and everything else is in proper case. We might have spelling mistakes in here that we want to check. We might decide that we want to replace certain items within this spreadsheet. So there's lots of things that we could do to tidy this data set up and make it look a lot better. And historically, before we had Power Query, let's imagine we live in that type of world again, we would do this in Excel, and we'd do it using a combination of utilities such as go to special to find all of the blanks. We would use maybe formulas, add in helper columns and clean up these columns using things like proper, trim, those types of formulas. And I will say that you can still do that. So if you're somebody who currently cleans up data using Excel formulas and utilities, that is absolutely fine. But there is a drawback to doing that, and this is where Power Query can be more helpful. If you can imagine, if I download this data set every week, so let's say every Friday, I download this data set with the latest update in it. I would have to tidy up that data set every single Friday, which is really, really time consuming. Whereas if you're using Power Query, you can just run the cleanup process once, and then you can effectively rerun it automatically on any other file that you add to the folder. So it's going to save you so much time. You don't have to go through the cleaning steps every single time you download the file. So that is the biggest advantage of using Power Query. The other big advantage, which you'll see in a moment when we open it up, is that it's so much easier. It's much easier to click a button that says trim as opposed to remembering the formula in Excel in order to clean up spaces in your dataset. So that is sort of the reason why you might possibly want to switch to using Power Query. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to connect to our text file, and I've just called this text file fakerholdingslimited.txt. It is fake sales data for a company that we've downloaded and we want to analyze. So what we can do here is, with a blank workbook open, we're going to go to the Data tab first of all. Notice here in the first group, we have Get and Transform Data. So this is where we can grab a file from numerous different locations. So it really depends where you have the file that you want to tidy up. So it might be that it's another Excel file. You could grab it from a different Excel workbook. Maybe it's a text file. You've got the text option there. Maybe it's a PDF that you want to tidy up, or you might choose to connect to an Access database. Maybe that's where your data's stored. So you can see that you have lots of different options when it comes to connecting to different storage areas for your files. Now, we've just got a text file, and let's just open it up and have a quick look at that text file. Faker Holdings Limited. Now, this is currently pretty messy. You can see we've got sort of some titles at the top here, some column headings, but nothing below really lines up with its column heading. So I'm not entirely sure how this is going to come across into Excel, but I'm going to guess that it's probably going to be pretty messy and it's going to require quite a bit of fiddling around with. So let's close it down, and we're going to connect to the text file. So in the Get and Transform Data group, we're going to click on From Text/CSV. And this is going to take us to File Explorer, where we can then go in and we can find the file that we want to use. So we're going to select Faker Holdings and we're going to import it. So what this is effectively doing now is it's basically connecting to that data source. We're connecting Excel to our text file. And you can see it's popped open this window with a very quick, brief analysis of the text file that I've connected to. And it's only going to show me the first 200 rows. It's like a sample, so you can see what it looks like. Now, at this stage, we have a couple of different choices. If you take a look down the bottom, you can see that we've got Load and we've got Transform Data. So if I wanted to, I could choose to just load this data directly into the Excel spreadsheet. So if you wanted to, if you decided that you wanted to clean up your data set in Excel using formulas and Excel utilities, that's absolutely fine. You could just do load and it will load it directly into the Excel spreadsheet. However, we don't want to do that. We want to transform our data using Power Query instead. So we're going to click on the Transform Data button. And if you've never been in here before, then this can look a little bit intimidating, but it's actually not too bad. It has pretty much the same structure as all of the other Microsoft applications. So we have our ribbons running across the top. You can see I'm currently clicked on Home. We have a Transform ribbon, we have an Add Column ribbon, and we have a View ribbon up here. So that's pretty much it. And on these ribbons, we have all of the commands that we're going to need to do various things to this data set and tidy it up. What else do we have on this screen? Well, just below the ribbons, we have this formula bar area. So again, if you're used to using an application like Excel, this is a very similar structure. This is just showing us the formulas that sit behind whatever you're currently clicked on. Now, I will say for this, you don't really have to worry too much what's going on in this formula bar, because everything we're going to be doing is down here in this grid area. Now, over on the left-hand side, you can see it just says queries down here. If I click the little arrow, it's going to expand that out. That's just going to show you the name of your file. So this is your query, effectively. Now, I like to keep this minimized just to give myself a little bit more screen space. Now, over on the right-hand side, this is where I think it's pretty interesting, because what we have here underneath query settings is we have properties and we have name. So currently that says Faker Holdings Limited. Now, generally, if I'm about to clean a data set, I will change this to say Faker Holdings _clean or something like that, just so I know. So I'm just going to change this right now to clean _data. I'm effectively changing the name of the query. So you'll see now, if I was to expand the queries panel, you can see that that name has updated on the left-hand side. And underneath that, this is where we have applied steps. And this is super interesting because this is where all of your steps get logged. This is like a recorder which records what you're doing. So it's a bit like, I guess you could say it's a bit like a macro. As you're doing things with your data set, it records each step of what you're doing. So this is why Power Query is really cool, because you can simply, when you have a new file, just rerun all of the steps again, and it will do it automatically because it's logging everything that you do. The other thing that applied steps is useful for is backtracking out of different things. So again, if you do something to this data set and you think, oh, that was a mistake I'd like to undo, you can simply remove the step. So here, the last step was changed type. Now, that's something that Power Query did automatically when I loaded up my data. So what I could do here is I could remove this step by clicking on the cross, and it's basically going to go back a step in the process. All right, so it's like doing a Control-Z. So the applied steps area is really, really cool. Now that we've got all that said, we understand a little bit more about what we're looking at on this screen, it's time to start cleaning up this data set. If we take a look at this very first top row, you can see it says Faker Holdings Limited, and then we've got some column headings up here, but it's a bit hit and miss as to whether they have things in them. So don't have anything there. And then we've just got _1, _2, _3. This doesn't mean anything to me. What I want to have are all of my different column headings in here. So order number, order date, product, category, things like that. But notice, because of the data set that we've imported, all of those column headings are down here in row 4, and they're all in the same column. I effectively want these to be right at the top of each column. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with. I can also see that there is a spelling error where we have quantity as well. So we're going to want to deal with that. What else might I want to remove from here? Well, we have row 5 has got some weird things in it. We just have some pipe symbols and some dashes. That's not very good for my final data set, so I'm probably going to want to remove that. What else do we have? Well, we've got some blank rows. Probably going to want to get rid of those. And if I look at the actual data, I can see that in this column just here, for example, we have product name and the category that that product belongs to in the same column. So I'm probably going to want to split those up across 2 different columns. I'm going to need to fix that. And if I take a look at my numbers, I can see, well, none of these have any formatting applied to them. I think this column just here is the price per unit, and this column just here, I think, is the quantity, and then we have the total at the end here. So I'm going to need to give all of these column headings, and I want to apply the correct data type to these. And then at the end here, we have another column which just has a few random numbers in it. Now, I think what's happened here is that when the data has come across, it's kind of got a bit out of sync, and these numbers actually belong in this column just here. You can see wherever there's a number, there's a blank in the previous column. So I'm probably going to want to somehow get these numbers merged across into this column. So those are most of the issues that we have going on with this data set. Now, if I was trying to do this in Excel, this is probably going to take me quite a long time, and I'm going to have to know quite a few different formulas and be pretty savvy with Excel in order to clean this successfully. The good news is with Power Query, we don't need to be that savvy because everything's written out in English and it's on a clickable button. So we can do things like remove rows and trim and clean and change the case of things. It's really, really simple. So let's start to go through and make this data set look pretty. The first thing I'm going to do, I can see up here in the first 3 rows, I kind of have some titles for this report. Now, I don't really want to include those in my actual table, my summary. So I'm going to remove the top 3 rows. So on the Home tab, we have a Reduce Rows group. We have a Remove Rows dropdown. And notice all the different options that we have in here, because we're going to be coming back in here in a moment when we want to remove our blanks. So you can remove top rows from here, you can move bottom rows, you can remove alternate rows, duplicates, blank rows, and errors. So loads of stuff underneath here. And if you want to remove the top 3 rows, for example, you just say remove top rows, and it will ask you the number of rows you want to remove. So I'm going to say remove the top 3, click on OK, and those rows have now been removed. How simple is that? Let's deal with, if we scroll all the way across, if you remember, I said that we've got some numbers here which really need to be merged. Now we can do this again very simply in Power Query. All we need to do is select the column to merge, hold down Control and select the column to merge it into, and then if we go to the Transform tab, we have a Merge Columns option just here. So if I click Merge Columns, it's going to kind of squash these 2 together. Now, it's going to pop up this box. It's asking me if I have a separator. I don't. I've just got numbers in here. I can specify my new column name. Now, I'm just going to leave it on the default, which is merged, because we're going to go through and rename all of our columns at the end. So I'm just going to leave all of the default settings as they are. Let's click on OK and check it out. It's now merged those numbers into the column before, and notice it's just given it the column name merged. Really nice and straightforward. So merging columns is simple to do. What shall we deal with next? Let's scroll across and take a look. I think I'm going to get rid of these blank rows next. So we've already seen where we need to go to do that. It's on the Home tab, Remove Rows. We have an option to remove blank rows. Now, this isn't going to ask you to specify a number. It's literally just going to look for any row that is blank. So any row that doesn't have anything in any of the columns. That's what it considers a blank row. So let's click on it, and those blank rows are now done. Notice as I'm doing all of these things, check out the Applied Steps pane on the right-hand side. It's logging everything that I'm doing. It's showing me that I removed the top rows, I merged the columns, I removed the blank rows. And if I wanted to get those blank rows back again, remember, we can just click on the cross. It's going to undo that step, and I have my blank rows back. Okay, so really nice and straightforward. Let's get rid of those blank rows again. What shall we deal with next? Well, let's deal with this weird black line in row 2. So where we have this kind of pipe symbol and then we have some dashes, this was probably a separator in the original report that separated sort of the headings from the actual data. But for what we want to do, we don't need this. So how can we get rid of this? Well, what we can do is we can filter it out. Notice that we have little filter drop downs at the top of each column. So what I could do here is click the drop down. It's going to show me everything that we have in this column. But if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, can you see there is that weird dashed line? So all I would need to do is deselect it, click on OK, and it filters that line out. Okay, so you can use filters to filter out whatever you like of your data set. What should we do next? Well, let's go in and let's split up these column headings, because in this first column, this is where we have all of our column headings. They've all been squished into this one column. Now, I basically want order number is this column just here, order date is this column, product dash category is this column, so on and so forth. Now, in order to get to that stage where we have these at the top of each column, we need to do a couple of things first of all. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I need to split up this information so that we have these headings in separate columns. And we can split this up using a delimiter. So because we have this little line, I think they call it a pipe symbol, in between each of these headings, we can use that to tell Power Query that that is where we want to split into a new column. So with this column selected, we can go to Split Column, and I'm going to say by delimiter. Now you can choose whatever delimiter you like. So it depends. You might not have these lines, these pipe symbols. Maybe you have a space in there, or maybe you have a dash, or maybe you have a comma, and you want to split up using that delimiter. That is absolutely fine. You have different choices in here. And if you can't see the delimiter that's in use in your data set in this little list, you can always go for custom, which is what we're going to need to do because we don't have pipe listed up here. So if we go for custom, and then underneath we can specify what our delimiter is. So as is that line. So when I click on OK, check out what happens. It's going to split all of those into their own columns. Can you see that? We now have order number, order date, product category, price per unit, quantity, so on and so forth. Now notice underneath, apart from the order number, because that was the first column, order date, we've got null values. We have null values in all of these new columns. And that's because it's basically just created these new columns based off of the heading. The actual data is still all the way over here. So there is order date, there is product category, so on and so forth. So the next thing to do here is nudge this across to the correct column. Now, there are a couple of ways that we could do this. So if we start with the order date column, for example, I could do what we did previously. I could merge the two columns together in order to get that data across into this column. So if we go all the way across, I'll just show you for the first one here. So here are our order dates. I can select the order dates, go across to the order date column, hold down Control, and then I can go to Transform and merge those columns. So if I click Merge Columns, again, I'm just going to leave all of these on the defaults, click on OK, and it's merged them across. Okay, so that is a really nice way of doing it. Let's do it one more time so you can see that again. You need to select what you want to merge first of all. So we're going to go across to Product and Category, this column just here. Let's go back, hold down Control, select this column, and we can merge the columns. Click on OK. So you could do it that way. Now, if you have a lot of data, so I'm talking about a lot of different columns, then you might think, oh, this is going to be really slow. Sometimes a quicker way of doing this is simply to delete out all of these columns with null in them and then just rename these columns just here. Okay, so what we could do here is we could select this column just here where we have our null values and go all the way across to this column, hold down Shift to select all of them, right click and just say remove columns. And then we can just go in and we can rename these columns to what they're supposed to be, which is what we're going to do in the next step. So you kind of have two different ways that you could deal with that. You can delete the columns and rename the headings, or you can merge the columns. It's entirely up to you. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to promote our top row so that those are our headings. Because if you take a look at our current headings, they're a bit all over the place. We have the actual file name as the heading in the first column. We have merged 1 as the heading in the second column, merged 2, and then _2, so on and so forth. And some of the headings that I want to use are actually in this first row just here. So order number, order date, product category. So what we can do is we can promote row 1 so that that becomes our heading row. If we go to the Home tab, in the Transform group, we have an option here, Use First Row as Headers. So as soon as I click that, it's going to pull it up and things are starting to take a bit more shape. We now have order number, order date, product category. Remember, these ones aren't named because we deleted them with those null values in. So I'm going to go through and just rename these columns. So all you need to do is double click where it says column 4 and you can type in whatever name for the column that you like. So this one is price unit. Double click the next one. This is quantity. And then double click the final one. This is the total. Okay, so things are starting to take a little bit more shape. What do we need to do next? What other issues do we need to fix? Well, if we take a look at the product category column, you can see that we have some weird spacing going on in here. We've got some tab spaces in here. Now, if I was working in Excel and I wanted to get rid of all of these spaces, I would use the trim formula. You might be familiar with that. It will just take out all of these spaces. Now we have the same thing in Power Query. And one thing I always say to people is don't just trim the column that is very obvious. I always trim all of my columns just to make sure there are no erroneous spaces lurking in there, because spaces can be the devil when you're trying to analyze a data set. So in general, what I'll do is select all of my columns. So I'm just going to hold down Shift to select them all, and then I'll trim the whole lot. Now you're going to find your trim underneath transform. In the text column just here, we have a format drop down, and check out what we have in here, because so many of these you might be able to relate to formulas that you've used in Excel previously. So we have lowercase in here. That is the equivalent of the function lower in Excel to change everything to lowercase. This is the equivalent to upper in Excel to change everything to uppercase. Capitalize each word is the equivalent to the proper function in Excel, where we just have the first letter of each word capitalized. We then have trim and clean. Again, two functions you may have used in Excel. So we're going to choose trim, and like magic, it trims out all of those erroneous spaces. So we are definitely looking a lot better now. What else do we need to do here? Well, this column just here, product-category. Now, for some reason, when somebody has put this data set together, they've decided to combine both the product and the category that that product's in the same column. And one rule of data analysis is that make sure that you split up your data. You don't want two separate things in the same column. So really what we want here is we want a column just listing out all of the products, and we want a column that just lists out the categories. Now, because we've combined them here and it's separated with a dash, we're going to need to split up this column. So again, we're just going to go to the Transform tab, Split Column, and we're going to choose by delimiter because I want to split this column where that dash appears. So we're going to say by delimiter. And again, we don't have a dash in here, so you need to choose custom. It's remembered mine from last time where I put a dash in. Click on OK and check it out. We now have product in one column and category in another column. I can then go in and rename these headings. So we're going to say product, and then we're going to say category. We are looking so neat now. If you think about what this data set looked like when we started and what it's looking like now, it's such a huge change. And still, everything I'm doing is being logged in this pane on the right-hand side. Final couple of things. It's always worth going through and checking the data types applied to each column. Now, when I say data types, I mean these little things just here. So can you see next to each of these column headings, we have these little icons. So if we click on the one next to order number, this is where we can see what the data type is for this particular column. And often you'll need to go in and check these and make sure you have the correct one applied, depending on what type of data you have in that column. So for order number, Power Query's picked up that this is text. Now, order numbers are a little bit, sometimes you want to have them as numbers, sometimes you want to keep them as text. I'm just going to keep these as text. But this one just here, order date, I want to switch to date. And you can see that moves it over. Product is text, and that is actually text that we have selected. Category is also text, that's fine. Price per unit, well, this needs to be currency, so let's switch it. Quantity, well, this is a whole number. And then finally we have total. This is also going to be currency. Okay, so always go through and check to make sure that you have the correct data types applied. So we're looking pretty good. We're almost at the stage where we can load this back into Excel and start our analysis. The final thing I want to show you here is just how you can create custom columns as well. So if you take a look, we have a totals column, and this totals column is basically a calculation. So price per unit multiplied by quantity. So if we didn't have this, I'm going to remove the total column from the data set. Maybe this is what our data set looked like. We've just got price per unit and quantity. We don't actually have a column that shows the total. What we can do is when we're working in Power Query, we can add a custom column that's going to perform that calculation. So if you're familiar with pivot tables, this is very similar to adding a calculated field. So what we could do here, if we wanted to add total column back in, is go up to the Add Column tab, and in the General group, we can create ourselves a custom column. So we can give our new column a name. I'm going to call it Total. And the way this works is you can't actually type a formula into here. You have to use the column names. So I want to do basically price per unit multiplied by quantity. So I can use the column names to do that. So we're going to double click on price per unit. We're going to put in an asterisk, which means multiply by quantity. Notice at the bottom it says no syntax errors have been detected, so I know that this formula is valid. And then when I click on OK, it's basically going to add that column for me with that calculation in it. And of course, I now have to go back in and set the data type to currency. Okay, so just be aware that you can do things like that. There's obviously so much more you can do with Power Query than what I'm showing you here when it comes to cleaning and doing different things. But these are some of the main things that you're going to come across. So we have a clean data set now, and we are pretty much ready to load this back into Excel and start our data analysis. So once we've tidied it all up, we're going to go to the Home tab. Notice that the first group just here is Close, and we're going to say Close and Load To. Now at this stage, you can choose what you want to load it into. So you could choose to load it into a table, or you could choose to load it directly into a pivot table or into a pivot chart. So if you just want a table, that's fine. We're going to create a pivot table right off the bat. So let's go to pivot table reports. I'm going to put the pivot table on an existing worksheet, and let's just put it in cell B3. Click on OK. So now it's creating a connection to that data. I've got my blank pivot table report, and I have my pivot table fields over on the right-hand side. And I can now work with this like a regular pivot table. So let's just do a very, very quick and small analysis. Let's grab category and drop that down into rows. And let's grab total and drop that down into values. And I'm going to do a little bit of formatting here. Let's change the number formats. Let's make those currency and take the decimal places down. And I'm also going to remove the grand total. So let's go to the Design tab, grand total, off for rows and columns. So I have my little data set just here. And I'm going to create a very quick pivot chart. So I'm going to go to Insert. Let's go. And I think we're just going to choose the clustered column chart. That is fine. So if you're used to working with pivot tables and pivot charts, you'll be familiar with this process. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting to this chart, not too much. I'm going to remove all of these grey buttons. So let's say hide all field buttons on chart. And I'm going to remove anything that isn't really serving too much of a purpose here. So I don't really need total in the legend. Let's just delete that out. I'm going to give my chart a title. Let's double click up here. What are we showing? This is total by category. And I'm going to right click and format this data series and just change the gap width on these. And I'm going to add some data labels as well, like so. And I think also if we select the data labels, I am going to remove the dollar formatting so we can expand number. And I'm just going to change these to number and take the decimal places down to 0 to format those labels. Notice that the labels are now formatted differently from the table. So don't forget, you can do things like that when you're working in pivot charts. You can apply different formatting, even if it's different in the table. So now I have my data labels. I'm just going to delete out the vertical axes because I don't really need that once I have these values at the top. So when you're working with charts, it's always good to try and make them as clean looking as possible and remove anything unnecessary. Final thing I'm going to do, because this blue, I don't know why it's annoying me, let's change this to a nice bright purple color. Right, so now we have our pivot table and we have our little pivot chart. I just want to show you what happens when something changes, how quickly this will all refresh. And I'm just going to go back to the original file. So Faker Holdings Limited. Now imagine that it's the next week and you've downloaded the new file from the external system and you've put it into this folder. Maybe you've overwritten the current file that's in there with the updated one. What you can then do is simply refresh all of your Excel data and it will pull through all of the new information. You're not going to have to go through and rerun all of the cleaning processes again, okay? Because it's going to remember what you did and apply it to any new data that's added into this folder. Now, just to cheat this a little bit, because I don't have a file to drop in, I'm just going to open this one and I'm going to change one of the categories. Just to make it different from what we currently have in this Excel spreadsheet. So let's just pretend that I'm just going to change this to the category beauty. Okay, and let's make this different as well. Let's make that 400 so it's more obvious. I'm just going to do File and Save. So effectively, the file that we've just used to build this pivot table and this pivot chart, that file is now different to the one that's currently sitting in the folder, which is this one here, and linked to this workbook. So if I want to pull through that new data, all I need to do is click on refresh. It's going to run all of our cleaning steps that we ran in Power Query to clean up any data that's been added, and all of these are going to update. So if you keep your eye on the pivot table or the pivot chart, you should find that a new category called beauty is added into here as soon as we refresh. So I'm going to right click on refresh. There it is. Beauty is added on the bottom, and it's also been added to the chart. That is all we would need to do each week. Every time a new file was put into that folder, we would simply right click, refresh, and it's going to pull it all through. We don't have to clean that data every single week.
A big congratulations, everyone, for making it all the way to the end of this course. So it's just about time for me to sign off and say goodbye to you all. I hope you enjoyed running through this course as much as I've enjoyed teaching it to you. Once again, my name is Deb. Bye for now.
Are you happy with this training? Make sure to subscribe for more great content. Visit the Simon Says It channel, explore our videos and training sessions, and decide what you want to learn next.